Okay, this is chapter 17 of Controlled Burn by Erin Soderberg Downing. Chapter 17. We sat around the fire for hours that night, eating our food as it became ready. The potatoes and carrots took over 2 hours before they were cooked through, and the camp pizza ended up being more pizza sauce flavored lumps of scorched dough than actual pizza. Grandpa let us eat s'mores first, explaining, your stomach doesn't know the order the food comes in. To pass the time, Griffin and I sang songs. Bears snoozed and kept watch for intruders who might sneak past the dark shadows beyond the glowing orange circle of fire. And Grandpa taught us both how to whittle sticks with a little pocket knife he had brought along. In the fading glow of twilight, he also started teaching us to use a compass, explaining how you can read the numbers and funny wiggling line to track a course through the forest. Sometimes, he told us, I'll spot smoke up from the tower and it look like it's not too far away. I'll radio it in from the lookout, but then I like to hike out to check on things myself. Don't you get scared? Griffin asked, echoing my thoughts exactly. What if you find the fire? Then what? Then I know its exact location, he said, and I know how big it is, which would give us some sense of what we're dealing with. Has that ever happened? I asked. Were you actually walked up to a live forest fire? Grandpa didn't carry a cell phone, and I learned from experience there wasn't any service out here in the middle of the forest anyway. So I wondered what he would do in that situation. It's not like he could call for help. No, he said, I wouldn't ever get that close to a true fire. That's for the Forest Service to handle. They have plenty of people who are trained to deal with the wildland fire. If I were to spot a smoke nearby, it's likely a brand new fire in the pre-ignition stage. That's the stage of the fire where the heat and oxygen combine and start to catch. Oftentimes, a new smoke is just a small fire that will go out on its own, or it's little enough that the Forest Service can deal with it before it gets to the flaming and flashover stage. Griffin and I exchanged a look. I wasn't about to say this out loud, but I personally didn't think Grandpa's method of searching for forest fires sounded like the way things are supposed to be done. I want to fight forest fires, Griffin said. You could do that, Grandpa told him, when you're older. They're always looking for people who are strong, brave, and good at working with a team to help with fire efforts. Have you ever fought a forest fire? I asked, wondering why I never thought to ask that before. Grandpa Howard was brave and tough, and it seemed like the kind of thing he'd want to do. I guess it was that Grandpa just seemed so old. I felt weird to think of him as ever being young and wild. Grandpa shook his head. No, I never got the chance, and then he wandered off, heading toward the edge of the trees. He was obviously done talking about it for the night. It felt like midnight by the time Griffin and I climbed into our tent, but when we checked Griffin's watch, it was only 9. It was just that dark outside, and once the fire had been put out, we doused it with gallons and gallons of water to make sure no stray embers crept out of the fire and the firebed and created problems in the night. I wanted to go to sleep. Grandpa climbed up the stairs to the tower where he was sleeping for the night, and Griffin and I retreated to our sleeping bags inside the tent. The wind blew whispers soft in the trees just outside the thin fabric of our tent. I could hear Bear shifting to get comfortable in the spot he had picked for his bed for the night. Somewhere off, a lone wolf howled out a solemn cry. Hey, Maya, Griffin whispered several long minutes after we both were tucked in for the night. Yeah? How come you won't go up in the tower, he asked. Are you afraid of heights? I flipped onto my back, staring up at the shadows of the branches making patterns on the roof of our tent. Why do you ask? You didn't come up to show me around the tower before, and I think we can both agree that inside that watchtower would be a much cooler spot to camp tonight. But instead, we're sleeping down here on the ground in this tent that your tent while your grandpa sleeps up there alone. Oh, I said, yeah, I guess the tower would be a pretty cool place to have a camp out, I agreed. But this tent is pretty cool too. For once, Griffin didn't respond. I've always been afraid of heights, I reluctantly told him. And drowning and falling and now fire. I'm a little bit afraid of everything, I guess. But what I've been realizing was my fears always felt a little less lately. Especially when someone else, Griffin or Grandpa or Wilma, needed me to be strong for them. I hadn't had the strength that night of the fire, but since then, I couldn't imagine ever letting someone down that badly again. Me too, Griffin said. I could hear the rustle of his sleeping bag as he rolled to face me in the dark. I'm scared of lots of things. That's normal, right? I considered this. Yes. Yeah, I said, it's normal to be afraid of things. But it gets a little better as I get older, right? He asked softly. Sometimes, I told him, not wanting to tell him that a lot of times your fears grow with you. Mine had. Griffin's breathing leveled out beside me, and I could tell he was close to falling asleep, and then he muttered. I guess fears are a little bit like a forest fire, then. You have to catch them before they get too big. They're easier to keep under control. He sighed and rolled his face the other way. Good night, Maya. Sweet dreams. That night, there were no nightmares. I don't know if I slept peacefully because my sleeping bag hugged me tight inside the cozy tent, or because of the background chorus of nature that blanketed us as we slept, or because of Griffin's soft breathing beside me that sounded so much like my sister's. Whatever it was, I was happy to wake up with no terrible visions chasing me into the day. After we packed up our tent, we made cold, deconstructed s'mores for breakfast, a plain graham cracker, a couple of raw marshmallows, and a bar of chocolate each. Griffin and I hadn't planned a breakfast, and none of us wanted to start a fire, but we also didn't have the energy to set off down the trail without eating something. When we got home, Bear was the first one out of the car. He trotted across the yard to greet Wilma, who was relaxing and snacking in her little pen. It looked like she had gotten bigger in the past 24 hours. Our little fawn was growing stronger every day, and her appetite kept growing with her. She started munching on grass in the yard, and she had now developed quite a temper when her bottle wasn't ready exactly when she wanted it. As hard as it was to think about ever letting her go, Grandma and I had started looking into wildlife education centers where Wilma would go to live when she'd gotten so big that Grandma and Grandpa's yard wasn't enough for her any longer. None of us wanted her to wander out into the woods that surrounded the town on all the sides. Since she had been raised without ever having to fend for or feed herself, and frankly, with Bear always nearby to protect her, she probably didn't have any of the necessary skills for survival out in the wild. Griffin and I both loved the idea of Wilma living in a deer preserve where people could watch and learn from her, and where she had been protected from the scary life she had faced if she were released into the woods on her own. That afternoon, I called home to check on my sister and parents. Griffin and I got started on Griffin's Marble Madness badge. Grandma B offered to teach us how to play a marble game, while also telling us about the history of marbles. I always thought they were just pretty glass balls that you collected and maybe filled the vases with, but it turned out there were all kinds of games you could play with them. After playing marbles with Grandma for a while, Griffin wanted to set up a marble race course. We tried making a maze in Grandma and Grandpa's backyard, but Wilma kept knocking over everything we set up. She liked to nose at the colorful marbles, so we moved our project to Griffin's fort and built a cardboard maze that wound all the way from the snack space to his nap nest. Summer and Thistledew had finally eased into a comfortable routine. We were marching along on Griffin's badge work. Bear was a well-behaved student, and Wilma was thriving. And both Griffin and I started to make serious progress at swimming lessons. With our teacher, Evan, bobbing along beside us, we actually managed to swim a few strokes of the front crawl with our faces in the water that week. Griffin and I were the only two in lesson group who had, so far, managed to swim all the way out to the buoys at the far edge of the swimming area. He told us it was looking like we'd probably be ready to earn our trip to the inflatable slide and climbing wall on the last day. One day after class, Evan took me aside and said I might want to consider joining the older advanced group when they took their victory swim for the wooden raft in a few weeks. For one split second, I started to shake my head, no, thinking that an impossibility. But then I remembered my promise to try to push myself to a new kind of person, to stop letting fears hold me back. So even though the idea of swimming out to that wooden raft terrified me, I smiled at Evan and said, maybe, but let's get Griffin out to the bouncy slide first, okay? Everything was finally beginning to click into place, which meant I wasn't at all prepared when my parents called with bad news. Amelia had developed an infection after her latest skin grafting surgery, and she wasn't doing well. They couldn't keep her fever down, and she wasn't responding to treatments. For the first time since I had gotten to Thistledew, the possibility was really and truly out there. I might never see my sister again. Still, as the visions forced their way back in, I didn't ask about coming home. I already knew the answer. It wasn't time. It's not that what my family needed from me right now. And I finally was ready to admit that I wasn't able to be there for them yet either. When it was time, I felt I would know. And when the time came, I would be ready.